Hi there maple fans, and in this series of videos I'll be sharing what I do throughout an entire year on a monthly basis. Please note that these months are based on UK timings, but of course can easily be adapted to anywhere else in the world. So welcome to this June video, and many of you may have bought Japanese maple in April, May, June. Very popular time of year to buy a maple, but there's a lot of misinformation out there, so I thought we'd have a countdown and see what's what really. So the first one to look at here is they're either red or they're green like this. And that's the only kind of varieties that are available, or perhaps like this garnet at the front of the house that we see here, these sort of dissected weeping types. I think this is sort of fairly commonly known, to be honest with you. However, if you move away from the sort of normal garden centres and go to some specialist nurseries, there's an absolutely massive variety and array of these maples to be had. There are in fact over 2,000 cultivars, so there's always more, there's always something to look at, there's always something new to find. So there we have Benny Shishihenge there, just looking gorgeous. There's even ones that are nearly pure white, which is quite amazing really. So that's Ukigumo. So you may well find that your local garden centre will stock a selection of these, but it really will be quite limited. It tends to be the ones that are perhaps a little bit easier to grow, or they grow faster so they can get more profit made and that sort of thing. Where some of the more unusual ones, absolutely brilliant, not that much more expensive to be honest with you, but just require a little bit more hunting for, to be honest. For example, we've got Okushimo here, which I've never seen in a sort of common or garden nursery. Absolutely fantastic with his little curled over leaves, so just looks brilliant really. So the next myth to have a look at is that Japanese maples can only be grown in full shade or very shady conditions, or possibly sort of morning sun and afternoon shade. But these trees at the top part of my garden here pretty much have sun all day. And certainly in the UK, in my sort of zone 8B area, they're absolutely fine. So we've got Shana there, we've got Shishikashira. And it's really rather sad that some of the labelling on these plants, they tend to just say, you know, shady conditions, semi-shade conditions, or tolerate full sun. Some of them really quite enjoy full sun, to be honest with you. The Atropoporium's fine there. And this little Cotonuito, absolutely fine. Its leaves go a little bit red. It kind of adapts to the sun really, but there's all sorts of reasons why in other videos I've done as to why they probably tolerate more sun than others, but nonetheless doesn't have to be a barrier to having Japanese maples just because you've got a south facing garden perhaps, but you just need to be careful and buy the right cultivars. So another common myth is that maples can't tolerate high temperatures. They absolutely can. I've seen them growing at 50 degrees in polytunnels. But in a polytunnel, there's no direct sun and there's no wind, which is really key. So having some trees, some bamboo, the right kind of fence that actually slows the air down is really important to them. And if you get that right, they'll survive in much more harsh conditions, basically. So here we are looking now at people who say they don't have enough space for Japanese maples. This is Twom's lead sentinel on the right-hand side there. That grows really vertically up in a sort of column fashion, which is really handy, whereas that Baihu there is a much slower growing tree actually overall, but grows up in a vertical upturned vase shape. So again, you might be able to fit one of those or other one in quite easily. These dissectums like Crimson Queen, they grow fairly slowly, they weep down, they're not so visually intrusive because they don't grow really high. So again, that's another option to do that. And just do love that lovely bit of new growth there. That's a great sign that the tree's doing really well. So we've also got the sort of more small sprawling trees like the Dissector and Filigree there. We've also got things like Little Princess. Now that's a very unusual tree because it stays really low but grows incredibly wide. So again, have a look around, understand the different cultivars. If you've got a particular need for a Japanese maple, whether it's because it's just on a patio, whether it's out in a garden, doesn't really matter. There'll definitely be one that really suits your needs. Whereas this one, say Sazunami, is incredibly fast growing, so the speed of growth can be really different too. And this is actually younger than many of the trees about here, but has grown really quite tall. So, you know, buying the right tree is really important. You've also got the habit of this Ryusen here, which has reached its final height already. It will never grow any bigger than that because it weeps down from the point at which it was grown. This is really handy for putting it on high to sort of go down the side of a hill perhaps or something like that. But it'd be really easy to trim the branches off at the bottom if needs be. This Maikawa Yatsubusa, that's sort of 5-6 years old already and is really small. So again, the idea that you can't have a Japanese maple because it's just going to get far too big is not the case. The Sirio next to it is 2 years younger, but actually is a considerably bigger brother, if you know what I mean. So again, don't be fooled. They're very, very flexible. And just to say, if you'd like to come with me on my Acer journey, please do like and subscribe to my little channel. It really, really helps. I've also recently set up a Patreon site, so that's a great way of supporting me too, and help out with some of the costs of my excursions, really. There's also the offer of some personal help, if you'd like it, either in a group format or on a one-to-one basis. So the next myth that's worth looking at is that some trees are just the same tree but at a bargain price. This isn't really the case. So this is my tree, I bought it, and this little Benny Mako hasn't got a graft point on it. This simply means that it's not a tree attached to another tree, it is growing on its own roots. Now, that's okay, and some trees will survive like this. They're just not quite as durable and quite as disease resistant as ones that are on a rootstock, as we'll see in a minute. And actually, many trees cannot grow on their own roots, so it does limit selections. So this Shiraz here will not grow well on its own roots, and as you can see, it's kind of two trees stuck together. And that can be quite misleading to some people. It looks like it's sort of been constructed in a funny way. So if you do have any bargain price trees, it's just extra important to follow all the advice in my videos, and they could do quite well. So if you have got a grafted tree, and these are sometimes sold in hardware stores as well, or most certainly sort of good Acer nurseries, a lot of people say that where the two trees join together looks quite ugly. But as you can see there, over time, it's virtually disappeared. So I think unless you're a bonsai enthusiast where the tree gets examined in very, very fine detail, stepping back, you're not even going to notice it really. So another error I think that's out there is the fact that you buy a plant, it's a particular colour, and you think, well, that's what it's going to stay for the whole season. Actually, this is Moonrise, which if you put it in the sun, goes a lovely, lovely sort of burnt orange colour, where this is Jordan, which is a sort of fellow Shuraswanum, and this has not been in any full sun, and look, it's a sort of bright, vivid green colour. So it's certainly not the case that if the description on the label says it's going to look like that, it will stay that way. Some will, but for example, the red acers can turn green if they're in too much shade, and the green ones can turn red if the sun is available. So many of these cultivars are actually quite versatile, and with careful positioning, you can get the desired effect. So just moving on to, it's all about the wonderful fall colours. I mean, absolutely, the fall colours of Japanese maples are phenomenal, and it's the big reason that people go to, Western Arboretum in the UK, that sort of place, in October to see them. But I mean, if you look at this lovely Wilson's Pink Dwarf, the new growth on this one is really pink, and it kind of lives up to its name really, against the red leaves that are more established. And that can look absolutely fantastic, really. So not only is lots of colour available, but it does change over time. You've also got things like the different leaf structure of this acontifolium. So there's loads and loads of interest. The colour of the leaves may be quite uniform at the moment. They will certainly be absolutely amazing come the autumn, but the leaf shape can be very interesting too. And this is Mana Nosato, so it's a purpley kind of coloured leaf with little hints of green there. So looking absolutely fantastic, really. And just behind that, we're moving on to butterfly as well. This is everywhere. I mean, it's really easy to get hold of. With loads of shade, you get this sort of buttery yellow colour against the sort of mint green leaves almost. Absolutely fantastic, and the sort of shape of the leaves is really, really good too. So well worth looking for. So you will find people who think that they're going to have to spend a fortune on a really good plant, perhaps because it's a grafted one, or they can only really, afford to buy the supermarket ones. These are about £16.50 from one of my favourite places in the UK to buy them from, Bartholomew's. And, look at it, it's doing really well. But what I would say, and this is a really good tip, these are left out in the environment a bit more. Some of the ones that are destined for the supermarkets are kind of like really nurtured very, very carefully in polytunnels for their entire life. And they tend to look really, really pretty, but they've never been hardened off. They've never experienced the real world, really. Whereas some of these might not appear at first glance to be, in the best of best conditions, but actually next year they're going to do rather better, and some of the cheaper ones are going to look rather scruffy. So they're just have been more adapted, really. So here we have a PV Dave that I think was about 35 quid or something like that in the UK. I think actually that's a proper grafted tree, and that's fine. This one is £9 and isn't. I think the £16 ones, the 1 litre versions, are really, really good value for money, because you can build your collection with a lot of trees, and they'll mail order them as well, in the UK at least, and other places in the world too will have their own suppliers. So that's a really good way of getting a grafted tree at the right price, and just growing them on yourself and see them develop over time, really. Just moving on to Japanese maples difficult to grow. They really aren't. I mean, sure, the conifers behind are just easy. You just put them in a pot and that's it. But as long as you obey a few simple rules, the main one is to put the tree in a pot that it wants to be in a location that it wants to be in. We really shouldn't have massive problems. We must always remember, in Japan, where they're native, they grow under the canopy of other trees, in amongst other trees as well. They have shelter from harsh sunlight, they have shelter from wind, and that's really, really key, to be honest with you. So another sort of common myth is that these trees are better in the ground, or they'll just do better. Once they're established, they'll certainly need less attention, watering, etc. But in all honesty, they can stay in pots for, well, indefinitely, really. Once in every several years, they might need either root pruning down, they might need a slightly bigger pot, but they'll do fabulously well in pots, and it will keep them a manageable size, which is lovely. So this is an Orange Dream. This is actually younger than some of the trees you've seen. It's probably, since I bought it, about 3-4 years old. And look at it, in the ground, it's doing fabulously well. They are non-invasive, and this is in clay soil. So some people say, well, it's got to be fantastic drainage. But honestly, this was a reasonable size when I planted it. It wasn't tiny. And I also put lots of drainage in there and stuff like that when I did it. And it absolutely thrives upon it. So clay soil, honestly, once the tree gets established, is full of nutrients, and they do really, really well. So we're really onto some pretty crucial stuff at this point in the video. It's all about watering. So this is Jerry Swartz, an absolutely favourite. And as you can see, it's reasonably dry. I'll give it a good dunk of water and we'll see what happens. I think the key thing to understand, though, is locations are different, pot sizes are different, cultivars are different. Treat each tree that you own not as a Japanese maple, but as a different tree. And that then it sort of becomes easy, really. Just demonstrating on here is a great tip for beginners particularly. There's not many bubbles appearing because it really was quite dry. But we'll come back to that tree in a second. Again, this tree, amongst others, is much drier. It just is, for whatever reason. Everything gets a slightly more or less rainwater. I think these water meters are absolutely brilliant as well, because you can sort of test at different depths. And you can see there that even pushing it right down to the bottom, it's still pretty dry. So that absolutely is telling me to give it a good old water. And when I do water, I want that to be dry to start with and then really, really soak through. I've no problem flooding the pot like that. Probably should use a rose on the end of my watering can, but there you go. What you can see there, though, is lots of sort of bubbles appearing and stuff like that. And that's actually a really good sign that I'm watering it at just the right time. So it's really good to understand when you need to water. And if you've done that, that's because the compost is still slightly moist. Therefore, the water's being absorbed into it. If you ever tried sort of watering fresh, really, really dry compost straight out the bag, I think people would understand this. So here we're going in with some more water on the Jerry Swartz. So I'm going to give it another top up and really just observe what happens again. And I'm still not really getting many bubbles. It's kind of, there's 1 or 2 on the top right, but not a lot happening there. So just moving on to another Japanese maple and asking the question, does the pot type matter? It really, really does. So this is Hiro Tori Nishiki, which is absolutely lovely. And as you can see, unlike many trees that we've seen, that's sort of in the middle. It's not a problem. But there we are. Now, I potted this tree into that pot a couple of years ago, and it didn't grow very well because the pot was too big. It's staying too wet all the time. But that glaze will really, really hold water in, whereas the unglazed pots won't. So consequently, it makes a huge difference. Now, the pot size doesn't matter. This is the biggie. It really, really does. And I'm just trying to show you, I've done other videos on this, you can watch those. This is a Trompenberg, which by now should be probably 4 or 5 feet tall. But because it's got so waterlogged in a pot that was far too big, The roots have rotted. It's caused massive damage to the plant. It's a credit actually to the root system on the plant that it's even survived, where I've had to repot it down into something much smaller to try and save it. So please don't do that. Just go up in really small pot sizes. And do bear in mind as well that if you repot something now, then the rest of the year is fairly dry, so you'll get away with it. But next spring, oh my goodness, a load of moisture like we've had this year, and that could be a major problem. So is the answer perhaps just to use incredibly free draining compost? This is what they use in nurseries, so they can sort of mass water the plants. It's going to drain through it really quickly, produce some really nice trees. But if you do this, that's absolutely fine. The trouble is you'll have to water potentially every single day. If it ever gets hot in this summer here in the UK, that's what I'd have to do, possibly twice a day. So if we use the incredibly free draining compost that the nurseries use, if you watch that water go in, and that's how quick it goes. It just pours straight through it. Brilliant for bonsai, totally get that. But how are you going to go away for a few days? Who's going to water all your plants for you? Could be difficult. So finally using a sort of more robust mixture in this way and giving this a really good water, on the third attempt we can see some bubbles going on. So again, a great tip. It's fine to use the compost. I use 50% Acer's compost, 50% John Innes compost, like a mature plant compost. And what we'll see here is if you water it 2-3 times, now it's really saturated, it's really soaked, and I've got some durability for the hot summer months. So this next one is a very, very commonly stated thing that you shouldn't repot Japanese maples until the trees are dormant. Now I'm going to sort of sidestep this because first thing to say is I've repotted all year long and never actually had a problem with this. But what are we calling repotting? So this little plant here, I'm going to repot it, which basically means I've just put it into a pot. I haven't used any more compost. I've surrounded it with some pebbles for drainage. What have I gained? I've gained some stability. It's not going to get knocked over. It kind of looks better. Why not? Why not use that system if you want to? Because what we don't want to do is put plants into a pot that's the wrong size, because that causes massive problems. I've given you a thumbs up. If you can give me one too, that would be fantastic. So I'm glad you made it to the end of this video, because this is a really crucial one. Lots of people, first thing they're going to do, get their new tree home and repot it. No way. This tree is fine. I can see some roots. I'd want that to be packed with roots. I want it to be bursting almost out of its pot, almost ready to be repotting. That's a much better solution. It really, really is. So the big trap, the big problem this year is that people are repotting far too early. The roots are rotting and we're having major problems. Please do like and subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. And there's loads of other videos that fills in lots of details about these points that we've discussed.